can't do that. And you might have noticed in listening to that the prominence of the cowbell, which
I love it.
Yeah, isn't it? It's just great cowbell. And they unfortunately didn't use the cowbell a whole lot in the Beatles, but they certainly did there. And it's also known for the first time that George Harrison used the Rickenbacker 12-string guitar in a recording session. So we're going to talk a little bit about that because that's an instrument that we have brought up before, much like the Moog synthesizer. We're going to do a little callback there in just a little bit.
Which, spoiler alert, will show up again tonight.
Prominently.
Sweet. Look at that. Yep. Look at that. I was hoping you'd say that, John.
Yeah.
So this is number 38 on the best ever albums list, Hard Day's Night. Actually, it's now it's number 40. It dropped a couple spots in the last couple months. It's number 1 in 1964 and 244 of all time. All right, so let's do some CTS trivia here. This represents the third album that we've covered that came in as number 1 in the year that it was released. Can either of you name the other 2 albums?
Miles Davis Sketches of Spain?
Yes, in 1960, and the other one being?
It has to be
Beatles,
earlier.
Please Me?
Nope. It was earlier.
Nina Simone, Pastel Blue?
Good call, but not quite. It's John Coltrane, My Favorite Things from 1961.
Wow.
Okay. So this was the number 1 album in 1964. It's also the album that I just read this morning that Judas Priest's Rob Halford rated as one of his top 10 albums of all time when he was polled for Rolling Stone's recent top 500 list. And interestingly enough, also on that list was Cream's Disraeli Gears, which we covered last week.
Well, you can definitely hear Hellbent for Leather in many tracks on this, I think.
It's very, very Hellbent for Leather, yes.
Yes.
So this is the Beatles' third studio album. It was recorded from January 29th through June 2nd, 1964, and it was released on July 10th, 1964. And the title of the record came from one of Ringo's malapropisms, or is it malapropisms, John? How do you pronounce it?
I've heard it both ways, but I go with malapropisms.
All right, I'm going with John. He's the English teacher. So malapropisms, which was something that Ringo was known to do. Other things such as the title "Tomorrow Never Knows" from the last track of Revolver. That was also one of Ringo's malapropisms. And he recalls how he came up with the phrase in an interview. He said, quote, "We went to do a job and we worked all day and we happened to work all night. I came up still thinking it was day, I suppose, and I said, it's been a hard day. And I looked around and saw it was dark, so I said, night. So we came to a hard day's night." And so when there's a couple of different versions of whose idea it was to name this record A Hard Day's Night, but that's what it was. And in addition, this was also made into a film. The Beatles had a couple of films that they made while they were a band, and this is the first film that they made together. And the title name of the film is this title name of this album as well. And side 1 of this record contained songs that were actually in the movie. So a couple of pieces of trivia about this record. It is the first record with a Beatles album with no covers, and it's the only album in their entire catalog that consists entirely of Lennon-McCartney songs. And Lennon is the primary songwriter on 9 of the 13 tracks here. McCartney is the primary songwriter of 3 of the tracks, and they took equal writing credit for the track "Happy Just to Dance with You," which was a song that was actually sung by George. So I think that this kind of goes into the storyline of, when the Beatles started, John was kind of more of the leader of the band. It was his band initially, and we see in the earlier years John had more of a leading role. That would slowly but surely kind of go in the direction of McCartney in the latter years as he took more direction and was more of the impetus for actually getting the band into the studio, but we'll certainly cover those things later on. But this is a very Lennon-heavy album. It had 2 singles on it, which included "Hard Day's Night" and "Can't Buy Me Love." Both hit number 1 on the charts. And the lack of the rock and R&B and blues covers allowed the band to showcase their pop sensibilities, which were tending to be a little bit more sophisticated than the originals that they recorded in their first 2 records. It's also one of three Beatles albums where Ringo does not take lead on any song, and that also is along with Magical Mystery Tour and Let It Be. And it's one of three albums that George doesn't contribute any songs, along with Please Please Me and Beatles for Sale. So as I mentioned before, this is the first album that George used the Rickenbacker 12-string electric guitar. It was actually given to him. It was a prototype that was given to him by the manufacturer, and this was the instrument that would go on to influence many others, most notably Roger McGuinn and the Byrds, and that's where you see a lot of that jangle pop sound comes from, the sound of the Rickenbacker guitar. And that is much, all over the place here.
How much music I love, thanks to Mr. Rickenbacker.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
It actually has 12 strings?
It does. Yep.
Oh, interesting.
12. It's not just a clever name. It's 12-string electric guitar, and it's got a very full sound, and it jangles, and it really is all over the place in this because George was pretty much using it in almost every track. So a couple of quotes about the record that kind of encapsulates what you're getting here. Writer Bob Stanley indicated that if you had to explain the Beatles' impact to a stranger, you probably play them the soundtrack to A Hard Day's Night. The songs conceived in a hotel room in a spare couple of weeks between upending the British class system and conquering America were full of bite and speed. There was adventure, knowingness, love, and abundant charm. And also, music critic Stephen Erlewine said that the album saw the band truly coming into their own as a band. All of the disparate influences on their first two albums coalesced into a bright, joyous, original sound filled with ringing guitars and irresistible melodies. And I think that both of those quotes are very good summations of what this record is. So a couple of details leading up to the release of this album. The Beatles manager Brian Epstein had, in the months leading up to it, had made a big push to get the Beatles more attention in the United States. And it was in December of 1963 that he was able to get heavy rotation of their single, I Want to Hold Your Hand, playing in the U.S., which eventually made it to number one. And this was the driving force, the final factor with them deciding to go tour in the United States. And this is when they landed in New York City in February of 1964, and that's where they played that famous Ed Sullivan show, which was viewed by an estimated 73 million viewers in 23 million homes, which was roughly 1/3 of the U.S. population.
Wow.
They made jokes later on saying that even like crime went in the time that they were playing. They were reporting lower crime rates because the criminals were even watching the show. So along with this trip and the sales of the material, it really paved the way for what would be known as the British invasion, and this was really where Beatlemania took off. And as a result of all of this popularity, United Artists Records offered the band a movie deal to produce 3 movies, and A Hard Day's Night was the first one that they did. It was recorded. It was not recorded. It was filmed over a 6-week period during March and April of 1964, where they played themselves in a musical comedy, and the film was very successful and generated comparisons to the Marx Brothers. A couple other things about the movie.
Let's not go overboard. But.
Well, Josh, I mean, it's time.
So is that Crime Wave story.
That came from George Harrison. So
yes.
Time magazine, Josh, rated it as one of the top 100 films of all time. I don't know if AFI did that, but Time magazine did.
In 1964?
Actually, I don't know what year they did that. I mean, that'll be a cleaning of the stacks. At some point, Time magazine rated it as... I suppose that's a good stat to have. Like, when did that happen?
Yeah.
George Harrison met his first wife on the set of the film, who was Patty Boyd, and he married her 18 months after meeting her on this set. Here's a pop quiz. You guys know who Patty Boyd is?
Layla.
You got
me on my knees. Yep.
Yes. Yeah, man. Yeah, she was the subject of many songs, including Eric Clapton, who stole her away from George Harrison, and I think they still remained friends, amazingly so.
That's some bros right there. That's
right?
some bros.
Yeah, really.
The film was actually nominated for 2 Academy Awards, including Best Screenplay and Best Score. And it was seen as a possible influence on music videos and music TV, including the Monkees TV show, because
for sure.
of the
that's definitely true.
Yeah, of the I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I mean, that's a totally separate topic, but it's quite quirky. Got a lot of British humor. I actually watched it again last night, and I was laughing out loud in several parts. Like,
Yes.
I forgot how funny it's very well done.
good.
I watched it on Sunday, rewatched it. It was funny.
And I did watch it as well, and it is.
Oh, good.
It is entertaining. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe we can bring that up in the conversation. So anyway, so that's a little bit of history of the record. Let's go through our opinions. Josh, we'll start with you. Fantastic album, or do you just have terrible taste in music?
This is their first truly great album, if not a masterpiece. There is no bad songs on this album. I listened to it multiple times trying to find something that was weak, and everything is great. They're doing different things in each song. There's so many like little cool things, like the cowbell that we talked about previously. I love the harmonica, and I should have known better. And I love her has this like almost Spanish guitar sound. And there are so many good songs on here. I love the Things We Said Today. I think that's a sneaky good cut, deeper cut on the album. I love the harmonies on this. It really seems like they stepped up their songwriting game, and just musically, they really like locked into what they were trying to do. That quote you had about I think the critic said about them crafting like their pop sensibilities. That is certainly true on this album. I really appreciate the fact that it's all original songs, as you know I've mentioned before when we talked about the previous albums. I think that really contributes to the strength of this album, and this album is eminently listenable. It just breezes by. You could just put it on repeat and I would have no problem with that. If you haven't listened to this album in a long time, listeners out there, do yourself a favor and listen to it. I don't have any bad things to say about it.
Okay, high praise.
You know what's fascinating, Matt? And before I get into my take, this album was released the same year as Beatles for Sale, wasn't it?
Beatles first. Oh, yes, it was. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So they're the tone of these two albums is massively different.
Mm-hmm.
Like Beatles for Sale just sounds like a dead tired, sort of almost morose band, right? And that was also a Lennon composition heavy album. And it's darker lyrically by quite a bit. This like shimmers. And so it's fascinating to hear in the same year that you would do this super... I mean, can you imagine that the band that recorded Beatles for Sale also could do a track like Anytime at All? You know what I mean? Where like John Lennon just bursts out of that track, right? Like with the vocals, it rings, that Rickenbacker guitar, which I mean, obviously, I think by now, people who haven't figured it out who've listened to this show, I love jangle guitar, so this is right up my alley. But the jangly sounds, the way that both John and Paul are singing, the tightness of the tracks, yeah, I mean, it's a jubilant, happy album with tons of great songs. It's by far the best of the four albums we've covered so far from the Beatles. And there's been other good ones, don't get me wrong, but this one's by far the most polished product. And yeah, there's singles all over the place, and they're spaced all over the place, which I also appreciated because, you know, you start off with A Hard Day's Night, and then you don't get Can't Buy Me Love till like number 7, and then those are the two big ones off of it. But, you know, and like you said before, it's the first 7 songs that are the score of the album, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, you could have released that as its own album, and it would be excellent. You know what I mean? Like, I guess it would be like, what is that, an EP?
I mean,
yes, it would probably be like a 20-minute
if they did that.
Yeah, and I mean, and yeah, that would have been, you know, just 15 minutes of awesomeness, because that's what it would have been. But even with the 13, it's still fantastic. This is a hard album to like break down by itself, because I always think of the Beatles as like early Beatles, mid Beatles, and late Beatles, right? And this is clearly an early Beatles album, and we've covered pretty much every other early Beatles album besides Meet the Beatles, which is sort of a compilation of singles, really, when I think of that, and covers.
Well, it was the American version of With the Beatles, really,
right,
is what that was. Yeah,
exactly. So we've pretty much covered everything from the early Beatles. This is the only thing that sounds like it could fit in mid Beatles as well, because there's a lot of... and we haven't covered them yet, so I don't want to go into too much, but there's a lot of what would eventually become Help and Rubber Soul and even Revolver in this album. I mean, they get more ambitious than this, but ambitious doesn't always mean better. And like, I mean, if you're looking at the Beatles as writing, this is like the Beatles in the context of 1964 and what's around them, you know, and that's girl groups and Motown and catchy, you know, one-off hits, you know what I mean? And I even think like Donovan and stuff like that. That's like the environment that they're in, you know? And yeah, when this pops, I can just imagine you're like, gosh, it sounds like that, but it's even more complex. And it's weird to call this album complex because, you know, what they'd become later, you always have to remember that. But just appreciating it for what it is, I just really enjoyed this album quite a bit. And I mean, the musicianship is excellent. It's, you know, like you said, they add in there's, you know, different small little elements like with the harmonica and, you know, the different guitars and choruses, just great. So high praise.
Yeah.
I mean, right from the opening twang of Hard Day's Night, it just that sets the entire tone right there, I feel like.
Yep.
Yeah. Gosh, I have so much to say. I first of all, Josh, you took the words right out of my mouth. I think this is clearly the first Beatles, the truly great Beatles record. You know, the two before that, Please Please Me and With the Beatles, are still very, very good albums. This is a different level, and this is really what kicks Beatlemania off to the stratosphere. And I think that, John, that's why, you know, when this came out, that, you know, the touring that they were doing, the popularity, the Beatlemania that was really setting in, doing the movie, you know, doing all the stuff, and they just got exhausted, you know, and then Beatles for Sale, they're like, all right, guys, let's go back in the studio, let's do some more, and they're like, we got nothing left, you know, so that's why they were kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel trying to find songs for that record,
right,
and we're sounding a little bit more tired.
So frantic, you know, you think in like a 2-year period they're releasing 4 albums, filming concerts. And that's going to be a theme that we're going to see with the Doors later, so I won't get into that too much. But yeah, the time goes quickly in the 60s when they were trying to get you to make albums. It was like, all right, right back in.
Yeah. And so Josh, going off like that, I would say that there is complexity in this record, but it's a different type of complexity, because certainly it's not as experimental as the stuff that they would do later on. But you are seeing things that they're doing here that are really interesting musically. And so, like, one of the things that popped out to me, I've always really liked the tracks "I'll Be Back" and "Things We Said Today." I agree that those are like kind of like good deep cut tracks for them. And I was reading both about them, that the dynamics of those songs, they move between major and minor keys. And I never really thought of it like that, but I think that's one of the things I like about it, because I love songs that are done in minor keys, and to me it's a lot more interesting. It's a little bit more of a somber sound, but like with different parts of the song, then they kick it up to a major key, and it's a different pace, and it's a different feel, and it's so good, right? And I think that you know, along with that, you've got something like, you know, the opening chord of Hard Day's Night, which to this day, I mean, if you read the Wikipedia page on that, there's people that are still arguing what that chord is that George Harrison is playing. Like, it's like an unknown thing. You know, he once described it as an F with a G on top, but he also said, well, Paul's also doing something in there to contribute to it, but I don't remember what it was. So it's like this, it's one of the most mysterious, if you will, guitar chords that's ever been recorded, but it does kick off the album to a really good start. And it's just such a good representation of where they were at this time. The movie is an excellent complement to this, you know, with their charisma, their energy, and just how much fun it must have been to have, you know, been a part of that, you know, at the time. And this is just a really fun record. I would even say, I think I might even like the second half of this album better. You know, with songs like
Wow, yeah.
I'll Cry Instead. You know, like I said, Things We Said Today. I love You Can't Do That. I think that those deeper cuts are almost, I get more excited as this album goes on almost, you know, but that's also not to say that there's any bad songs on here. This is just it's a fantastic record. And I think that, you know, there's also, John, you were kind of mentioning there, you know, maybe some signs here of what was to come with kind of the mid period Beatles. and
Oh,
you
yeah, if
hear
you like
that
minor
word, like,
and major chords, help.
Yes.
I mean, it's like filled with minor and major chords. So
Right.
I feel like this album's almost like a compliment to Help in some ways.
yeah. And I think that, when they end the album with a song like "I'll Be Back," which is kind of like a more of a somber song, it's interesting that they chose that to be the final track. I think it's after something that was so, for the most part, upbeat and fun. I mean, it's still upbeat, but it's also kind of got this like it's got this overall feel that's a little bit more of a sadder, melancholy type feel. But it's just such a good record, and there's so many things to like about it. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of it. This is one of my favorite Beatles records, and it's certainly my favorite album from this period by far.
Matt, did you say that?
All right, mic drop. Okay, cool.
Oh, did you say George and Ringo didn't sing lead on this album at all? You there?
Well, George has one song that he sings lead on, and that's "Happy Just to Dance with
Happy
You."
Just to Dance with You,
okay.
yep.
It was specifically. Yeah, that was the one song on the album that was. I mean, they're all Lennon-McCartney songs, but that's the one that had the most collaboration between the two, or at least from what I read. And they specifically wrote it for George. I guess they wanted him to, have an opportunity to sing. George at this time was still a little bit, a little new to the songwriting game, and he was lacked some confidence of singing his own material. So, but they gave him a great song to sing.
Wasn't he quite a few years younger too than the rest of the Beatles?
Yeah, he was the youngest. I think he was like, he was a couple years younger than John and like 10 months younger than Paul or something like that.
Oh, okay, so not
yeah.
as much as I thought. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. But no, he was pretty young. And Ringo doesn't sing on this at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought somebody was different was singing on "I'll Cry" instead. I thought maybe that was a Ringo song.
Nope,
I
that's John.
didn't look. Okay.
That's John. I mean,
yep.
yeah, and pretty much the other songs, whoever was the primary songwriter also took the lead on the song as well. It's very Lennon heavy. But Paul did "Can't Buy Me Love," so
Yeah.
it was pretty good. So yeah, just a couple other things that I found interesting in doing the research on this. Kurt Cobain has a cover of "And I Love Her" that was resurfaced, that was put on that weird documentary they did on him
Montage
several
of
years
Heck,
ago.
yeah, it was really good. It was it's a really interesting cover too.
It's very sad. That's a very depressing documentary.
Yes, it's the cover. It's funny you said that, because that's what I thought as I was hearing the song. I actually had rewatched that documentary recently with a family member, and it's a really Kurt Cobain's a huge fan of the Beatles, especially the early and mid Beatles. So yeah.
And I played that song earlier today. I was like, God, that just sounds so much more depressing than what the Beatles version is. Yeah, it sure is. And also, when they did the song "Tell Me Why" in the film, it was performed for a group of about 350 paid actors, including a then 13-year-old Phil Collins, who I'm sure we'll talk about later on, but he did start off as a child actor. Yeah. So he's kind of in that crowd somewhere in the film.
And became an adult actor in Buster, I believe, later, right, Josh?
What?
I don't know. I didn't know
Was that the TV show about the butler?
No, it's a movie.
Oh, that was Benson.
That's Benson.
The reason
that was Benson.
The reason I remember that he was in Buster is because when I was a kid, there was a channel that would run pay-per-view movie previews, and probably from when I was about 7 to 10 years old, right? And every once in a while I would watch that channel, and they would play stuff on repeat, and sort of like the timeline of when it would be on would be about a 3-week period. And I vividly remember I was fascinated by the fact that the guy from Genesis was also had a movie, and I remember thinking how weird it was. And yes, the movie was called Buster.
Yeah,
and I could tell just
1988.
Yes, so I would have been 8. So yeah, it fell in the thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It must be good from 1988.
Well,
I'm gonna guess it wasn't good, but yeah.
Let's just say it's not available streaming anywhere.
Yeah.
So.
But this movie, I don't know. I forgot how much this makes me laugh, and there were several scenes where I'd seen it several times, but it's been so many years, and I was laughing out loud in several parts. So I recommend the film as well. I will say it's kind of hard to follow some of the dialogue because they must have overdubbed a lot of the dialogue because it seems hard to follow, and they're talking so fast in that Liverpool accent. But it's still, you pick up enough to really get what's going on. But it's pretty good.
It's not really like a complex narrative to the
yes.
to the film.
Well, it's
no, but the jokes slip by you quickly, though. So
yeah.
it's hard to pick up on some of them, and some of them pass.
Yeah,
and
there's
some
a lot
of the
visual stuff too.
Yes, and some of them pass by you because you're like there was a thing like the grandfather in the film. It's Paul's grandfather, and they keep calling him clean.
Paul's
like,
other grandfather.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
like that's his other grandfather. He's very clean though, isn't he? And it's a running gag. And I was watching that with Sherry, and she's like, "Why do they keep saying clean?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And then I realized that guy was an actor. He's an actor in a famous British sitcom, and part of his character was that he was called a dirty old man. So it was a play on that. It was like, and so if you know the show, you know that's why they're doing it. You know,
trope of British comedy, the dirty old man. Thinking of like Benny Hill. You know what I mean? Like that seems to be. Like if we have any British listeners, could you tell us why you love the dirty old man like comedy trope so much? So, and I have to say, as much as I enjoyed that movie, let's not call it Citizen Kane because I would argue that they somehow took that and said, let's make a show in America and the Monkees that actually did Hard Day's Night better than Hard Day's Night in some ways. If you go back and watch those Monkees episodes, so.
I got to do that someday. I know I used to watch them when they were on Nickelodeon, but it's been so long.
You will be pleasantly surprised by how funny it is.
Can you stream that somewhere? Is that available anywhere that you know, John? Can you do a plug for that?
I don't know. I have not watched the Monkees in a long time. I did, however, post the funniest moments from A Hard Day's Night on our Twitter. So if you want to check back a couple days, there is a YouTube clip of the funniest moments, and it is very funny. But yes, A Hard Day's Night was clearly what birthed the Monkees as a thing because it's exactly what that ended up becoming. So
no, the Monkees is not streaming anywhere.
Yeah.
So you have to buy
well,
the
it should.
DVDs. Yep.
If you have the ability to stream stuff, go ahead and stream the Monkees, please.
Probably some music rights issues. That's usually why things are not streaming or not on release.
Gotcha. So. Well, this is a fantastic album. So highest recommendation. It will probably end up, when I'm doing my top 10, it will probably end up near the bottom of my top 10, which is a high place to be because we'll have done about 130 albums in the 1960s.
Yeah,
so
John, aren't you you're an early Beatles guy, right? Isn't this your wheelhouse?
Mid is my favorite, and then early would probably be my second. There's certainly lots of stuff I like later, but I find the later albums to be genius mixed with crap. So it's like you know what I mean.
I
so
can't wait for those episodes.
The highs are higher, but there's also a lot of I appreciate your ambition, but not so much. Whereas this, it's like I can appreciate like 13 tracks coming at me that are just like stellar across the board, and I think that's why. And I feel like the mid Beatles. Well, we can save that for another time. But the mid Beatles kind of complement both areas to me, but that's a conversation for another day.